Imagine hearing footsteps in your attic every night. You search the house, you search the barn, you search the property, but every single time, nobody is there. Then one morning you discover footprints in the snow leading from a nearby forest directly to your home. The terrifying part? There are no footprints leading back out. It's as if someone walked to your house and never left. A few days later, your keys go missing. Strange noises continue above your bedroom. A newspaper appears inside your home that nobody recognizes. You start to feel like you're being watched. Then one night, your entire family is murdered. And when investigators arrive, they discover something even more disturbing. The killer didn't leave. They stayed on the farm for days, feeding the animals, preparing meals, sleeping under the same roof as their victims. More than 100 years later, nobody knows who committed the Hinterkaifeck murders, and what investigators discovered after the killings would make this one of the most chilling unsolved true crime cases in history. In the early hours of April 4th, 1922, a shocking discovery was made on a remote farm in Bavaria, Germany. 6 people had been murdered, an entire family wiped out. The killer had vanished without a trace. More than a century later, the crime remains unsolved, and many investigators still consider it one of the most disturbing murder cases in history. This is the story of the Hinterkaifeck murders. To understand why the case continues to fascinate people today, you have to understand just how isolated the farm was. Hinterkaifeck was not a town. It wasn't even a village. It was a single farmstead located between the Bavarian towns of Ingolstadt and Schrobenhausen. The nearest neighbors lived far enough away that screams would likely go unheard. The property was surrounded by fields, woodland, and long stretches of empty countryside. It was the perfect place to disappear, or to hide. Living on the farm in 1922 were Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, and Victoria's 2 young children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. A maid also worked on the property. By most accounts, Andreas Gruber was not a pleasant man. Neighbors described him as harsh, controlling, and difficult to deal with. Rumors surrounded the family. Stories circulated throughout nearby villages. Some of those rumors involved disturbing allegations about relationships within the household. While many details remain disputed today, the family was not particularly well liked by everyone around them. But despite the gossip, life on the farm continued much as it always had, until strange things began happening. Months before the murders, Andreas noticed something unusual near the edge of his property. There had been fresh snowfall. As he walked through the area, he discovered footprints leading from the nearby forest directly toward the farm. At first, that wasn't particularly alarming. People occasionally crossed rural land, but something about these footprints bothered him. When he followed them, he realized there were no tracks leading away, only tracks leading toward the farm. It appeared as though whoever had walked there had never left. Andreas mentioned the discovery to neighbors. Some reportedly suggested it was probably nothing. Others found it unsettling, but nobody could explain it. Soon afterward, more strange events began occurring. The family started hearing footsteps in the attic. Late at night. Slow footsteps. Sometimes they sounded like someone walking from one end of the house to the other. Whenever Andreas investigated, he found nothing. No intruder, no animal, no obvious explanation. The sounds continued. Then objects began disappearing. Keys went missing. Household items were misplaced. At one point, a newspaper appeared on the property that nobody recognized. Nobody in the family subscribed to it. Nobody knew where it had come from. Andreas reportedly became increasingly concerned. The farm felt different, like somebody else was there, watching, listening, waiting. The family's previous maid eventually quit her job. According to reports, she believed the property was haunted. She complained about the strange noises. She claimed she no longer felt safe living there. Eventually, she left. Looking back now, many people wonder if she sensed something was wrong, something far more dangerous than ghosts. On March 31st, 1922, a replacement maid arrived at the farm. Her name was Maria Baumgartner. It was her first day on the job. Several family members accompanied her to the property. After helping her settle in, they left. That was the last time anyone outside the household would see most of the family alive. What happened next remains one of the greatest mysteries in true crime history. Investigators believe the murders began sometime during the evening. For reasons nobody fully understands, members of the Gruber family were somehow drawn into the barn one by one. Whether they heard a noise, whether somebody called to them, whether they were investigating something unusual, nobody knows. But what happened inside that barn was horrifying. One by one, 4 family members entered, and one by one, they were murdered. The weapon was believed to be a mattock, a farming tool similar to a pickaxe. The attacks were brutal. By the time the killer finished, Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their daughter Victoria, and young Cecilia were all dead. Then the killer entered the farmhouse. Inside were 2-year-old Josef and the new maid, Maria. Neither survived. 6 victims, 1 killer. No witnesses. At least, that's what investigators initially believed. But the true horror of the Hinterkaifeck case wasn't just the murders. It was what happened afterward. Days passed. The family failed to appear at church. Young Cecilia didn't attend school. Neighbors noticed unusual silence coming from the property. Still, nobody immediately investigated. Rural farms were isolated. People often kept to themselves. Life continued. Yet signs suggested something wasn't right. Mail went uncollected. The family disappeared from public view. Eventually, concern grew too great to ignore. On April 4th, several neighbors made their way to the farm. As they approached the property, they expected answers. Perhaps the family had left unexpectedly. Perhaps someone was sick. Perhaps there was a simple explanation. Instead, they walked into a nightmare. The bodies of 4 family members were discovered in the barn, stacked together, covered with hay. Nearby investigators would soon discover the bodies of Maria Baumgartner and little Joseph inside the house. The scene shocked everyone involved. But as authorities began examining the farm, they uncovered details even more disturbing than the murders themselves. Evidence suggested someone had remained on the property after the killings. Animals had been fed, meals had been prepared, the fireplace had been used. Someone appeared to have been living normally on the farm, despite 6 bodies lying nearby. The implication was terrifying. The killer hadn't fled. The killer had stayed. For how long? Nobody knew. But as investigators would soon learn, the mysteries of Hinterkaifeck were only beginning. As news of the murders spread throughout Bavaria, police descended on Hinterkaifeck. What they found raised more questions than answers. The crime scene was unlike anything most investigators had ever encountered. At first glance, it appeared to be a brutal family murder. But the longer authorities examined the property, the stranger the case became. The first unsettling discovery involved the farm itself. Despite 6 murders taking place, daily chores had continued. The cattle had been fed, the horses had been cared for. Fresh hay had been distributed to the animals. Someone had clearly remained on the property after the killings. Investigators estimated the killer may have stayed for several days. That realization horrified everyone involved. Imagine murdering an entire family, then eating meals in their kitchen, sleeping under their roof, walking past their bodies every day. The killer seemed completely comfortable remaining at the scene. As detectives examined the barn, they noticed another disturbing detail. Young Cecilia, one of the victims, had not died immediately. Evidence suggested she survived for several hours after the attack. Clumps of her hair were found tangled in her hands. Investigators believe she had pulled it out herself while lying wounded in the darkness. The image haunted those who worked the case. A terrified child, injured, alone, waiting for help that never came. The autopsies confirmed that all 6 victims had suffered devastating blows to the head. The attacks were violent and personal. This wasn't a random act of robbery. It felt deliberate, focused, almost targeted. Yet if the murders were motivated by theft, the killer had made a strange decision. Money remained inside the house. Valuables were left untouched. Nothing significant appeared to be missing. If robbery wasn't the motive, then what was? Police began interviewing everyone connected to the family: neighbors, relatives, farm workers, travelers, anyone who might have crossed paths with the Grubers. The list of suspects grew quickly. One theory focused on the family's troubled reputation. Andreas Gruber had made enemies over the years. Some believed a personal dispute may have escalated into murder. Others pointed toward rumors surrounding family relationships and long-standing tensions within the community. But no evidence directly linked anyone to the crime. Then investigators remembered the strange events that had occurred before the murders. The footprints, the attic noises, the missing keys, the unexplained newspaper. Suddenly, those incidents seemed far more important. What if someone had been hiding on the farm before the murders? What if the killer had been watching the family for weeks? Perhaps even months? Detectives searched the attic. They found signs suggesting someone may indeed have spent time there. The space offered a clear view of parts of the farm below. A person could potentially observe daily routines without being noticed. The possibility was terrifying. Every strange event suddenly fit together. The footsteps, the missing items, the feeling that someone was nearby. Perhaps they were. One of the most discussed suspects was a man named Carl Gabriel. Officially, Carl had died during World War I years earlier, but rumors persisted that he had survived. Some locals believed he secretly returned home and discovered something that drove him into a rage. Others dismissed the theory entirely. There was never any proof. Yet the rumors refused to disappear. Another suspect was a neighbor who displayed unusual interest in the investigation. Several witnesses later claimed his behavior seemed suspicious. Some believed he knew more than he admitted. Again, there was no definitive evidence. The investigation continued. Weeks turned into months. Months became years. Still no arrest. Still no answers. Authorities reconstructed countless scenarios. Perhaps the family knew the killer. Perhaps they willingly opened the door. Perhaps the killer lived nearby. Perhaps the killer had been hiding in the attic all along. Every theory seemed possible, yet none could be proven. As time passed, another chilling possibility emerged. What if the murders were carefully planned? The killer appeared familiar with the layout of the farm. They knew where to move. They knew how to avoid detection. They knew how to care for the animals afterward. This wasn't the behavior of a panicked criminal. It suggested patience, preparation, knowledge. And that possibility made the case even more disturbing. Because if the killer knew the farm that well, they may have known the family intimately. Someone they trusted. Someone they never feared. Someone who could walk through the property unnoticed. Years after the murders, investigators revisited witness statements. Again and again, they encountered the same problem. Too many possibilities, too few facts. The physical evidence available in 1922 was limited. Modern forensic techniques didn't exist. Mistakes were made. Potential clues were lost. Witness memories faded. The trail grew colder. Yet one mystery continued to haunt everyone who studied the case. Why stay on the farm? Why risk being discovered? Why remain surrounded by bodies for days? Some experts believed the killer may have been mentally unstable. Others suggested they were simply waiting for the safest opportunity to escape. But a darker theory emerged. Perhaps the killer enjoyed it. Perhaps they felt ownership over the property. Perhaps after eliminating the family, they viewed the farm as theirs. Nobody knows. And that question remains unanswered to this day. By the end of the investigation, more than 100 suspects had been considered. None could be conclusively connected to the murders. The case remained open. But with each passing year, hope of solving it grew smaller. Still, the mystery of Hinterkaifeck refused to die. Because hidden among the evidence was one final detail. A detail so unsettling that it would keep investigators debating the case for more than a century. The possibility that the killer wasn't a stranger at all. The possibility that the family had unknowingly shared their home with their murderer long before the first attack ever occurred. And if that was true, then the horror of Hinterkaifeck began long before the murders themselves. More than 100 years have passed since the murders at Hinterkaifeck. The farmhouse is gone. The victims are gone. Most of the original investigators are long gone. Yet the mystery remains. And perhaps that's because no theory has ever managed to explain everything. Over the decades, countless suspects have been proposed. Some investigators believed the killer was motivated by revenge. Others believed the murders stemmed from a personal dispute that spiraled out of control. A few believed the answer lay within the family itself. One of the most frequently discussed theories involves Carl Gabriel. Officially, Carl, Victoria's husband, was killed during World War I. Military records supported his death. Yet rumors persisted for years that he had somehow survived. Some locals claimed they had seen him after the war. Others believed he secretly returned to the farm. According to the theory, Carl discovered something that enraged him, something involving his family, something that drove him to murder. It's a dramatic explanation. But investigators were never able to find evidence proving Carl survived the war. The theory remains speculation. Another suspect emerged much closer to home. Several people who lived near the farm attracted police attention over the years. One neighbor in particular displayed unusual interest in the case. Witnesses later described behavior they considered suspicious. Some believed he knew details he shouldn't have known. Others thought he appeared strangely comfortable discussing the murders. But suspicion alone isn't evidence. No charges were ever filed. No definitive connection was established. Then there is perhaps the most unsettling theory of all, the hidden intruder theory. The idea that somebody had secretly been living on the farm before the murders. When people revisit the strange events leading up to the crime, this explanation becomes difficult to ignore. The footprints leading toward the property, the footsteps in the attic, the missing keys, the newspaper that appeared from nowhere. Each event suggests the presence of an unknown person, someone moving through the property unnoticed, someone learning the family's routines, someone waiting. Imagine going to sleep every night while a stranger watches from above. Imagine hearing footsteps and convincing yourself it's nothing. Imagine discovering years later that the sounds may have been your future killer. For many people, that possibility is more frightening than the murders themselves. In modern times, criminal profilers have examined the case. Some believe the killer was highly organized. The attacks were methodical. Victims were isolated. The killer maintained control throughout the crime. Remaining on the property afterward suggests confidence rather than panic. Others argue the opposite. They believe the decision to stay behind indicates psychological instability. A rational killer would leave. This one remained. Feeding animals, preparing meals, living among the dead. That behavior is difficult to explain. Perhaps the killer felt ownership over the farm. Perhaps they considered the murders justified. Or perhaps they simply enjoyed the power of knowing nobody suspected they were still there. We'll probably never know. One of the greatest obstacles in solving the case is time. The crime occurred in 1922. Modern forensic science didn't exist. DNA analysis was decades away. Fingerprint databases were limited. Crime scene preservation was poor by today's standards. Many potential clues were lost forever. Evidence was handled by numerous people. Curious locals walked through parts of the property. Investigators unintentionally contaminated the scene. Mistakes that would be unacceptable today were common at the time. As a result, modern detectives examining the case often reach the same frustrating conclusion. The evidence simply isn't enough. The truth may have disappeared with the killer. Yet despite all these limitations, the Hinterkaifeck murders continue attracting attention from around the world. Books have been written, documentaries have been produced. Researchers still debate suspects more than a century later. And perhaps that enduring fascination comes from one simple fact. The case feels incomplete. Most murder mysteries contain answers, a suspect, a confession, a motive, something that allows people to make sense of what happened. Hinterkaifeck offers none of those comforts. Instead, it leaves us with questions. Questions that become more disturbing the longer you think about them. Who left the footprints? Who was walking in the attic? Who took the keys? Who placed the newspaper inside the house? And most importantly, who murdered 6 people and vanished without a trace? Somewhere in Bavaria, a person carried that secret for the rest of their life. Maybe they blended into society. Maybe they raised a family. Maybe they sat beside neighbors who discussed the case without realizing the killer was listening. Perhaps they read newspaper articles about the investigation. Perhaps they even attended funerals, all while knowing the truth, a truth nobody else would ever discover. Today, the fields where Hinterkaifeck once stood are quiet. The farmhouse no longer exists. Visitors can stand near the location, but they won't find the barn, they won't find the attic, they won't find the rooms where the family lived. Time erased those things long ago, but it didn't erase the mystery, and that's why the case continues to haunt people. Because somewhere between the footprints in the snow and the silence that followed the murders lies an answer. An answer investigators spent decades searching for. An answer that died with someone. Whether it was the killer, a witness, or someone who simply knew too much. The secret was buried long ago, and unless new evidence somehow emerges after more than a century, the Hinterkaifeck murders will likely remain exactly what they are today. One of the most chilling and unsettling unsolved crimes in history. A story of isolation. A story of fear. A story of a family that sensed something was wrong, but never discovered just how close the danger really was. And somewhere, hidden in the darkness of history, the identity of the killer remains unknown. If you enjoyed this video, let me know your theory in the comments below. Who do you think was responsible for the Hinterkaifeck murders? Don't forget to subscribe to Fear Frequency for more true crime, unsolved mysteries, and disturbing cases. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant,